Everyone is in.
Okay, well then let's go ahead and get started. I want to say welcome to all of our guests and members of the public who are joining us today for the Wild Pig Forum. Thank you very much for being here. It's being co-hosted today by the California Fish and Game Commission and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We appreciate everyone's interest in this subject. We know there's a lot of passion around it, and our commissioners have identified this as a subject of interest and of concern, and requested that staff and the department work together to put together this opportunity to learn more about wild pigs in California, not only the issues around wild pigs, but also potential solutions to those issues, and to engage our stakeholders and the public in that dialogue. So that's why we are here today. First, before we get into the details, would like to share with you some logistics for this morning that are very important. If you find yourself with any technical issues and need some assistance, please call 916-902-9286, or you can send an email to the commission, our standard email address, which is fgc@fgc.ca.gov. When you join the meeting, you should have been muted automatically, and if you have video, it will not be displayed today. Questions can be asked using Zoom's Q&A function. If you're not familiar with that, you can hover at the bottom of your screen. You should see a Q&A, and we have a couple of staff, Ari and Vicky, who will be responding to those questions and queuing others up for our panels this morning. So please use that function if you have any questions that you would like to ask today. Supporting the forum today, we have several staff from the Commission and from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, including Ari Kornman, our Wildlife Advisor, Mickey Monroe, who is the Statewide Conflict Programs Coordinator with the Department, Chris Stutz, who is Assistant Chief and Tribal Liaison for the Law Enforcement Division, Brett Fumas is the Senior Environmental Scientist with the Game Conservation Program at the Department, and Taylor Williams, who is the Hunter Angler Recruit, Retain, and Reactivate Manager with the department. And then I am the Executive Director of the California Fish and Game Commission, Melissa Miller-Henson. We're also pleased to have with us today a number of speakers and panelists who will share with us some of their knowledge and experience in this arena, as well as help answer questions during the forum. Our two moderators will introduce those individual panelists in just a short while when we get into the panels. And of course, we are extremely grateful to have with us today two members of the California Fish and Game Commission, Vice President Erica Zavaleta and Commissioner Eric Sklar. And I suspect each would like to say a few words before we get underway with the presentations. And so, Vice President Zavaleta, would you like to start?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today in all of these different capacities to learn together and to discuss what's a really complex issue and one that's central to California's native fish, wildlife, and ecosystems. So I'm Erica Zavaleta, the Vice President of the Fish and Game Commission, and I'm joining today from my home in Santa Cruz in the unceded territory of the Awaswa-speaking Yupi tribe. And I want to set the tone by acknowledging all California Native American communities who have inhabited California lands for thousands of years. We honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples who are deeply connected to the fish, wildlife, and habitats we manage. And we take seriously our trust relationship with these sovereign tribal governments and do our work together with and with much respect and gratitude for those who've lived in California since time immemorial. Now, our mission on the California Fish and Game Commission, in partnership with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, well represented today, as Director Miller-Henson just introduced several folks. It begins with providing leadership for transparent and for open dialogue, where information, ideas, and facts are easily available, understood, and discussed. And so that is the central purpose of today's meeting. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Commissioner Sklar, for his leadership in addressing this issue of California's widespread non-native wild pigs. And I want to thank our commission staff, our partners at the department, and our several partner state, federal, and regional agencies who are all participating today and contributing their expertise and time. And a final principle I want to emphasize is our commitment to mutual respect today as we work across a diversity of perspectives and views. We may not agree on everything, but this is our opportunity to hear each other out respectfully and learn from each other. And Commissioner Sklar, I'd invite you to share your opening remarks with us.
Great. Thank you, Vice President Zavaleta, and thank you for a great introduction. I think you really set it up well. And, you know, this has been a process that's been going on for a while. It started with some discussions when I first got on the commission 7 or 8 years ago now, and want to really commend the staff for putting this together and welcome everybody who wants to participate. This will be there's a complicated problem and it'll be a complicated process to look at solutions, but this is a great start. And in fact, the real first start is SB 856, which was passed unanimously by the Senate and the Assembly, 0 no votes. It's a bill to allow greater hunting and a few other things to help reduce pig numbers a little bit, but it's just a start. I really want to commend Senator Bill Dodd for writing that legislation and getting it passed so overwhelmingly, and I'm hopeful that the governor will sign that, which will have to happen in the next week or so, as the bills on his desk are getting signed. And I think that bill, again, is a really good start, and really want to thank Senator Dodd. I think this process can be the next step, which is really about management and how we look at solving this problem. Because, as a farmer, and a landowner, I've seen directly the impact that these wild pigs can have. I've seen it out in the wilderness where they destroy habitat, and they are dangerous, both to humans, pets, and other animals. But their impact can't be understated. And it's been going on for a long time. I mean, the first feral pigs were released hundreds of years ago, but there's been a steady increase in their population to the point now where they're all over the state. I think almost all of our counties have wild pigs. There's certainly some areas that have more of a problem than others, but they are a real problem on so many levels. The destruction they cause is enormous. They're not at all native, and we've got to address this problem for the sake of all of the folks and wildlife and critters who are being impacted by these feral pigs. So I'm really excited that we're doing this today, and it's been a while coming, but again, it's part of a process that we'll be, I'm sure, seeing over a number of years. So thank you, everybody, again, and Vice President Zavaleta, I give it back to you.
Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Ari Kornman to provide the background presentation and context for today's session. Ari. Ari, I can't hear you.
That's why. There we go. Just wait for the presentation to get up.
Can you see the presentation, Ari?
I can't.
There we go.
There we go.
Have it.
Okay, there we go. So this is just going to be a very quick general overview of wild pigs in California. Next slide. Okay, so near as we can tell, wild pigs were introduced by the earliest explorers to the United States, like Columbus, De Soto, as far back as the 15th century. Domestic hogs were first released in California in about 1769, and European wild boar were introduced in California in 1925. And you can see, at least since 1982, the spread that they've had throughout the United States. And you can even see in the circled area there, the spread in California, how quickly they've spread across the United States. And that map of California on the left is not the full range of wild pig in California. Actually, they're pretty much statewide. I think there's only 2 counties which have not detected wild pigs, and that may have actually changed recently. They could even be there. It's essentially a statewide problem. But the hatched area there is what we would consider the core area. It's where most of the depredation permits are. It's where most of the hunted animals are. It's where most of the sightings are. Those are pretty much the core area. But again, it's a statewide range, statewide problem. Next slide. Here's some quick facts about them. Those estimates, 200 to 400,000, are really rough. Those are the going estimates that you'll hear, but we don't have a lot of confidence in those because we're using proxies like hunted animals and stuff. We don't have a really good unbiased, scientifically valid study on pig densities and abundances. But who knows, maybe in the future we'll get to that point. But that's the estimates that you'll usually hear. The wild pig is the most fecund large wild mammal in North America. A wild pig population can double in just 4 months. They're incredibly prolific. Sows can produce 1 to 2 litters per year. In litter sizes in Northern California, average 5 to 6 per sow. So lots of babies constantly throughout the year. They can have babies pretty much anytime throughout the year. They're nocturnal, which makes them difficult to control. And they're also incredibly intelligent. They catch on to control methods quickly and they learn to avoid them, which just makes it that much harder. They're true generalists. They eat just about anything and they live in just about any habitat. So they're pretty ubiquitous. There are places that they're more dense, but they can survive in especially the wild boar part of the spectrum can live in just about any habitat, even some real cold, snowy habitats.
Time check, Ari.
Okay. The next slide. The term wild pig is used to mean both types. Feral pig, which you can see kind of on the left, lower left there, is what we consider more of a feral domestic pig, and on the right, upper or lower, what we would consider more of a wild boar. Wild boar have longer legs and larger heads with longer snouts than feral pigs. But we do use the term wild pig to denote both, and there is hybridization and intermediate types, as you can see. These are not all California examples, but they're representative of what we have here in California. So just a quick overview of the forum. We're going to divide it into 2 parts: wild pig issues and wild pig solutions. We'll be hearing about domestic animal health, wildlife health, ecosystem health, and economic impacts for the issues. And then we'll move after the break into solutions, where we'll explore wild pig damage management, consumptive and non-consumptive activities. And one of the main objectives and things that we'd like to convey is that true pig control and management requires a comprehensive approach. The bill is a start, and hunting is an important piece of pig control, but it's not the whole solution. And we're going to need a holistic, comprehensive solution if we're really going to make a dent. And that's my talk. So thanks, everybody. And don't forget, if you have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A.
Thank you for that reminder, Ari. And just want to emphasize something that was really important that's been mentioned here, and Ari reiterated. But while we recognize that there are issues with wild pig in California, I think our commissioners have also been very clear that we probably don't have any hope of eradicating wild pig in California. It's really more an issue of management and what are the different techniques or strategies that can be used for managing wild pig, to what degree. Because clearly for many of our hunters, wild pig is a game mammal that many of our hunters enjoy. So I think that's going to continue. And the issue is that's one of the strategies that can be used for managing wild pig. So we're going to go ahead and move into our first first set of presentations. And our first speaker is going to be Hector Webster, who is a veterinarian with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. He's going to be talking with us about animal health. And Hector, I'm going to bring up your presentation here in just 1 second. And my screen has frozen for the moment. Give me just a second. Hector, if you want to go ahead and start and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Hector Webster. I've been working for the Animal Health branch of the California Department in Food and Agriculture, Animal Health and Food Safety Division for over 25 years, and I've been working many of the issues related to surveillance programs as wild pigs are a concern for us for many of the diseases that have impact on livestock populations. I'm the program lead for the swine, small ruminant programs, and I'm the liaison on issues with wild pigs as it relates to diseases that may impact the domestic swine population. Go ahead, is the presentation, I don't see the presentation.
Yeah, PowerPoint had to restart, so it'll be up here in just a moment. It decided to crash on me. Okay, and it should be popping up here in just a second.
Here we go. Thank you very much. So thanks for the opportunity to present some of the issues and especially diseases of concern to the domestic livestock population. And so I'll be covering really briefly our animal health programs and some of the diseases that we are concerned and some of the efforts that we are conducting right now to mitigate some of the impacts as it relates to domestic populations in California related to wild pigs. Next, please. Yeah, our division is made up of 6 branches. The main one dealing with diseases is the animal health branch, followed by the livestock identification, meat, poultry, egg safety branch, milk, dairy, food safety, antimicrobial, and animal care. We all work with the California Department of the California Animal Health and Food Safety Laboratory in partnership to with the diagnosis of diseases of concern. Next. The animal health branch focuses on several livestock and poultry health programs. We have surveillance programs, traceability programs as it relates to animal identification, emergency response and preparedness for diseases of concern and regulatory diseases or emergency diseases. We have an equine medication program, and most recently, we have a domestic wildlife interface program. As I mentioned before, we work with the California Department, with the California Animal Health and Food Safety Laboratory through the different regions in the state with private diagnostic labs and private practitioners and the public in general. Next. Our domestic wildlife interface program focuses mainly in disease mitigations and other animal threats, including multiple species. We collaborate with a lot of with several agencies, education agencies, universities, and projects in coordinating in the analysis of animal health surveillance, disease mitigation, as it relates with a focus on domestic wildlife interface. We provide veterinary support to our Division of Animal Health and Food Safety Services and the Wildlife Disease Management and relevant activities. Next. These are the multiple species I was talking about. We have a significant number of animals, domestic livestock, in California. Next. Some of the diseases of concern to us in animal health for that it will be a threat to change the disease free status. We have achieved free status in cattle brucellosis, swine brucellosis, and swine pseudorabies. These are the main diseases of concern right now, especially swine brucellosis, that is a zoonotic disease that have an impact on humans. We know that both of swine brucellosis and swine pseudorabies are present in wild pigs and the wild pig population. Next. So I just want to emphasize here that we monitor diseases and we monitor the incursion of diseases in wild pigs. As I mentioned, we have pseudorabies and brucellosis in the wild pig population. We have the domestic swine surveillance programs. We test a lot of pigs at the slaughter facilities. We test on-farm animals. We do test high-risk swine, which is classified as those swine that are in proximity to feral swine areas and they have the likelihood to be exposed to feral swine. I want to say that the feral swine testing in wild pigs and feral swine in wild pigs is conducted by USDA Wildlife Services. And we know that through the surveillance programs, at least 16 counties, we have detected pseudorabies across California and 9 counties of swine brucellosis. Some counties, they have dual detections for both of these diseases. We are free of swine brucellosis since 2001 and swine pseudorabies in 2001 and swine brucellosis since 1980. African swine fever, another big disease of concern to the swine industry, has not occurred in the US or in California. Classical swine fever was eradicated from California in 1970. Next, please.
And a time check, Hector.
Yes. This pictorial shows pretty much how we conduct the surveillance. We have on the left side the domestic, on the right side we have the feral swine. Next. The other diseases of concern is foot and mouth disease, and as I mentioned, African swine fever and classical swine fever. Next. We have tested in California over 1,100 samples in the feral swine population, and also in the domestic swine population, over 1,400 samples. All of those have been tested since 2019, and those have been negative. Next. We provide education. We encourage everyone here and the producers and the laboratories to report any diseases that pose or may pose significant threats to animal health. We do a lot of education through the publication of our reportable disease list annually. Next. And finally, we do a lot of education to mitigate feral swine problems, and we'll do that to increase biosecurity procedures or interventions for preventing the incursion of feral pigs into the domestic swine population. We educate a lot on feeding practices, illegal practice of feeding out of uncooked contaminated meat products to swine and the risk of importing illegal contaminated meat products. Next.
We need you to wrap up.
These are all the multilingual materials that are available for everyone that you can access in through our website and the USDA website. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Hector. Very informative. All right. So our next speaker is actually Brandon Monk. And Brandon is also a veterinarian, and he's with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's going to be talking about wildlife health. And Brandon, while I bring up your PowerPoint, if you want to start your presentation, that'll be up here in just a second.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Appreciate being here. As Melissa mentioned, veterinarian with Wildlife Health Laboratory with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I work mostly with game species. I was asked to talk about wildlife health. And more the term health is a very broad term. So as I thought about this, I thought, okay, well, most people want to know about what the pig population health might be, or individual animal health might be, and that would plug into Wildlife Services surveillance programs, plus a lot of what we know about the various diseases that affect pigs. And I'm not seeing my presentations.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
I just realized I forgot to screen share. I'm sitting here staring at your presentation. I'm like, oh, okay, cool.
No worries.
All right, it's up.
All right, great, thanks. And if you want to hit slowly go through slides 2 through 4. You guys have seen this a little bit already. This 1982 pig population across the U.S. And then the next slide would be, I think, 2004. And then the next slide would be 2016. And I put this up here because this to me just shows that from a population health standpoint, it's almost certainly robust throughout the nation. Wild pig populations continue to expand, numbers continue to increase, more counties continue to find pigs. But also there's a couple counties like up in North Dakota and the Northeast that there's no way pigs got there on their own. They needed help. So part of the big health, wildlife health, ecosystem health, animal health is also the movement of these animals across the landscape. Next slide. So, our bread and butter is often disease surveillance, and 2 diseases in particular, both of which Dr. Webster hit upon, are swine brucellosis and pseudorabies. And swine brucellosis is a bacterial disease. It can cause abortion and lameness and inflammation or abscesses in various tissues in affected swine. And in California, the estimated prevalence is between 1% and 5% where it's been detected, and the red counties is where it's been detected. The yellow counties is where samples have been taken from wild or feral pigs and has not been detected, and the white counties is where there's been no sampling. It is zoonotic, and this is one of the things that from a hunter's perspective, folks should be aware of. It can cause disease in people. Usually it's fever, sweating, headache, muscle joint pain, and fatigue. It's a fairly rare disease in people, so it's one of those things that it's best to be aware of in case you end up having to go to a doctor to have a fever of unknown origin looked at. And it can be avoided by using appropriate personal protective equipment like gloves, eyewear, face masks while you're preparing your harvest, and properly cooking any meat from the harvest. Next slide. And then pseudorabies is another disease that we surveil for, and this is surveillance that was started by California Department of Fish and Wildlife from a while ago, and then USDA Wildlife Services has really taken it over and done a great job of continuing the program. Pseudorabies is different than swine brucellosis. It's a herpes virus, and most herpes viruses, once an animal is infected, they're infected for life. So similar prevalence in the counties that have detections, again, red counties, about 1% to 5% prevalence. The assumption is once you detect it in a pig population, it's in the pig population and will remain in the pig population. It can cause death, respiratory distress, and neurologic disease in young swine. And feral swine are considered the main reservoir for this disease in the U.S. And from a native wildlife health perspective, pseudorabies is a potentially important disease because some of the critters that will feed on pigs, like mountain lions, are susceptible to pseudorabies virus, and often it's a fatal infection in those wild canids and felids that are susceptible and may be exposed. Recently out of China, there's been some reports of very rare cases of encephalitis. That's inflammation of the brain associated with pseudorabies virus, usually in farm workers that are have close proximity to affected pigs. Next slide. And and to me, as a wildlife health professional, this is one of the really big, quote unquote, wildlife health issues. Is pigs are a reservoir for and potential intermediate host. So an intermediate host is a host that could be infected and actually increase the amount of infectious, like virus or bacteria that can then be exposed to other susceptible animals. And there's quite a long list of diseases that our feral pigs are known to be susceptible for or have, including E. coli, salmonellosis, and influenza, which we're hearing about now with the iPath avian influenza outbreak in North America. And pigs could be an important reservoir for this, not only for exposure to people, but also for exposure to our native wildlife. And it's a area of wildlife health that I think needs additional research into and knowledge on. But we know that it is very much a risk factor for these viruses and bacteria when we have feral pigs around. And Dr. Webster hit on African swine fever and classical swine fever. And African swine fever has started knocking on our door. And it's one of those diseases that once it gets into the feral pig population in North America, it's probably here to stay. And that could have significant ramifications on our domestic pig population and economics. Next page, or next slide, please.
And a time check.
Thank you. Yeah. Direct effects to native wildlife certainly occur. They are food generalists to the extreme. Anything and everything from invertebrates to all clades of vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. This is probably the best picture I could find that kind of directly highlights that. They can and will predate our native species, including our native deer. But also, next slide, also habitat nest destruction. And it's not popping up. Oh, there we go. And this is from Australia, but where pigs co-occur with breeding grounds for or nesting grounds for turtles, they can cause significant damage to nests for endangered turtles. And direct competition, right? So resource competition. If there's pigs on the landscape, they're competing with our native wildlife for those resources that are available, and those resources are finite. And I think that's it.
All right, thank you so much, Brendan. Appreciate your presentation. We are now going to move to Matt Cheney. And Matt Cheney is joining us today from the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And he is going to talk with us about ecosystem health. And Matt, your presentation will be up here in just a moment.
All right, thank you, Melissa, and good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Matt Sharp Cheney. I'm a wildlife biologist with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, which is located in the coastal central California. And I'm here to give a crash course on the ecological impacts of wild boar using our experiences here on Mid-Pen lands as a case study. So next slide, please. Not seeing it yet. Yeah, the next slide will be include a video. Just wait for that to pop up. And this was taken by Ken Hickman, a local researcher, and shows a wild boar wallowing in Sierra Azul Open Space Reserve. You might have to just click play. And it really showcases how wild boar really act like biological rototills. They're able to very effectively displace soil by digging with their powerful tusks, snout, and hooves. This male boar is creating what's known as a wallow, which they use to cool off, remove parasites, and potentially to attract mates. Next slide. All right, wild boar are known as ecosystem engineers, meaning they can physically alter a landscape. So this can lead to damage to trees from rubbing, you can see on the image here, and removal of up to 80% of understory cover in areas that have been rooted in. Boar primarily feed on vegetation and will root in the soil for tubers, roots, corms, as well as invertebrates, creating vast areas of disturbance like you see in the images here. And in the grasslands of California, disturbed areas are often reoccupied by non-native annual grasses that are quick to recolonize bare ground. So if boar root and wallow in sensitive habitats like wetlands or serpentine grasslands, they can directly impact rare plant species. Next slide. All right, so all of this rooting and wallowing also impacts water quality, as you can see in the figure here. By disturbing soils and directly contributing to erosion, wild boar can increase sediments in streams and wetlands, leading to poor water quality conditions. Next slide. And in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where I am, we have several threatened and endangered species that rely on high quality wetland and stream habitat. A few examples of these include the threatened California red-legged frog, which lay eggs on vegetation in ponds, the endangered San Francisco garter snake, which hunt around ponds and wetlands and require vegetative cover to avoid predators, as well as coho salmon and California steelhead, which spawn in rivers and streams and require clear water and rocky substrates that can be impacted by increased sediment loads. As mentioned earlier, boar can directly compete with native wildlife species for food and other resources, and boar can also cause direct mortality on vertebrates and are known to eat frogs, snakes, small mammals, salamanders, and birds. Next slide, please. Now, where I am in the San Francisco Peninsula and the Santa Cruz Mountains, our region is pretty isolated from surrounding areas, being a peninsula. And in addition, the habitat found in these mountains is not exactly ideal for wild boar, which tend to do better in low grassland valleys and oak woodlands with streams and reservoirs that still hold water in the late summer months. So there's a seasonality to boar impacts on mid-pen preserves, where we tend to see an increase in wild boar activity in the late fall through early spring, when water is available in the high mountain areas and there is abundant forage and loose wet soil that they can easily root in. In dry months, boar activity seems to subside here in mid-pen lands. Next slide. All right, and then shown here in purple, despite the habitat being less than ideal for boar, we had a large number of boar damaging habitat in our skyline region in the early 2000s. Next slide. And we undertook a multi-year trapping effort to remove boar from 2001 to 2007. Mid-pen regulations do not allow hunting on district property. So we worked with local trappers, other regional agencies, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to trap and remove 341 boar. And as you can see in this chart, we began trapping fewer and fewer individual boar through time. And in 2008, we switched over from active trapping to monitoring of boar activity. Next slide. I'm glad to say that our boar observations have been minimal in the skyline area since, but in 2020, we received multiple reports of boar activity in the Sierra Azul region, shown in purple, which is very close to the Santa Clara Valley area, which is known to have a very robust population of boar. These reports included multiple individuals as well as sows with piglets, indicating that breeding was taking place. We have since initiated another trapping effort in this region. Next slide. Now, this is especially important for us to manage the boar population in Sierra Azul, considering that there are 2 upcoming wildlife crossing projects shown in red along Highway 17 that will be completed in the next decade. These wildlife crossings will provide passage for native wildlife and boar alike, making it essential for us to reduce boar numbers now to reduce their potential to spread further into the peninsula in the future. Next slide. And lastly, here are my sources. And next, we will learn about the economic impacts of wild boar from Katie Little. Thank you.
Good morning. I'll just wait for the presentation to come up. My name is Katie Little, and I am a policy advocate for the California Farm Bureau. I specialize in livestock issues as well as wildlife and endangered species issues for Farm Bureau. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about the impacts, as Matt was saying, on the agricultural industry. A few of the panelists obviously before me have already touched on really important issues such as disease that affects animal populations and damages that can be caused by their feral behavior, their wild nature, and as the previous slides have kind of shown, the damage that can be caused to wildlife as well as livestock and the topography of grasslands, as well as I will show you some pictures of some damage to agricultural operations. So I'll focus on mostly, obviously, that aspect, as we have talked a lot about the other aspects and the damage caused by wild boars. So just moving on to the slides. Alrighty. I just wanted to touch on some agricultural stats, it being one of the largest, obviously, industries in the state. Agriculture, we have nearly 70,000 farms. Agriculture supports over 1 million jobs throughout the state. We are the top state in the nation in cash receipts, and these are our top 5 commodities, all things that have been directly affected by wild pig populations. And even these commodities that you see listed here are, for the most part, concentrated in the regions we saw in that first presentation, kind of along the coastline, as well as obviously dispersed throughout the state. Next slide. So a survey was done several years ago to see what wild pig damage has cost farmers and ranchers throughout the country. It is estimated to be over $11 million throughout the state. When the research was done more locally in the 29 counties that were surveyed, ag commissioners found that at least $1.7 million in damages was caused. Again, this study was conducted several years ago, so we are estimating upwards of at least 2 million in damages caused now by the feral pigs. Again, going back to the first presentation, in that there being a very rough estimate of 200 to 400,000 pigs, that now live in California. Along with that rough estimate, we would assume that these costs have gone up, not only obviously because an increase in swine populations, but also because, obviously inflation rates that we're all feeling and natural rising costs that maybe aren't necessarily associated with the pandemic, but certainly since this study was done in I believe, the late 1990s. Next slide. So damage, obviously, like we have seen in the previous slides, can include soil compaction, damage to the native plants, reduced water quality due to the spread of disease, impacts on other species. As we saw in that one picture, we do know that wild pigs do predate on young livestock, and that could include calves, lambs, kids, as in goats, et cetera, et cetera. So, and again, I'm just going to briefly just touch on the fact that wild pigs present a real food safety issue with E. coli. That is a major issue in the Central Coast area that grows a lot of California's leafy greens. A lot of the E. coli outbreaks that happen, I think we've all seen a news story in the last several years about either romaine lettuces or spinach, obviously being a large E. coli contamination outbreak that can be traced back to feral pig populations in the area. So again, just a public safety, a health issue that is occurring in that area, and obviously having a large economic impact on those farmers and ranchers. Next slide. So again, we've been talking about how they eat anything. They are willing to obviously search for food, go to any source. So they are known to uproot what we call row crops. They can eat the seeds, they can eat the plants, they can eat the fruit, the vegetable, any part of that crop that obviously meets their needs. Their vegetable and nut fruit crops are their favorite. They also, in addition, ruin pasture land, as again, we've seen in previous slides, by making their wallows and then killing the perennial grass species that provide the feed to the livestock. Another cost that is then incurred upon farmers and ranchers throughout the state is maybe trying to prevent the pigs from coming onto the property that create this destruction. So an additional cost to farmers would be maybe putting up any fences, any deterrence measures that could help protect the crops, protect the animals, as well as providing vaccines for any of these diseases. These are all maybe increased costs because of the invasion of the wild pig into onto their lands. The damaged pastures and rangeland increase the operational reliance on outside feed sources. So having to truck anything in, such as hay, if they cannot rely on the native grass species to feed their cattle, they will have to truck in additional feed, which again is an additional cost. Next slide. So I just found this picture on the, I believe it was a USDA website on a pamphlet talking about wildlife or the wild pig destroying cropland. And so as you can see, this is a row crop, and the wild pigs came in and uprooted all the seeds. Next slide. Again, just want to touch on the fact that disease transmission is a primary threat they pose on livestock, and so it's very important that farmers and ranchers maintain a safe herd, a safe environment for their livestock and for ultimately the food chain. Again, Dr. Hector Webster already touched on the fact that these diseases are coming in and can very well spread very quickly. I believe Dr. Monk also touched on the fact that if the African swine fever comes in, that it'll be very hard to get rid of, and it's most likely here to stay. I also just want to touch on at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned, inflation obviously being an issue, more of the recent costs and impacts on the farming and ranching community. Obviously, the recent drought has a huge impact, port congestion issues that continue to be a problem, increased input costs such as fertilizer, equipment upgrades to cleaner vehicles within farming operations. We're moving to those cleaner vehicles. Those are also upgrades, economic impacts, lack of labor or increased labor costs, and obviously fuel costs are affecting everybody. And I know everyone here can probably see that, and it's you can see it on the store shelf right now. So again, these wild pigs also just causing another economic impact on California farmers and ranchers. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for that. Obviously representing a very important industry here in California with agriculture. Appreciate your presentation. And we are now going to turn it over to Brett Furness, Dr. Brett Furness with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's going to moderate the first panel today, which includes all of our previous speakers. And Brett, are you ready?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brett Furness with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this forum, interesting forum today. I work in the big game unit at the department, and so we're responsible for the conservation and management of 6 large mammal species, including wild pig. And so you've heard 4 really good presentations giving you some background on the issues of wild pigs in the state. And so we're going to launch into kind of a mix of some pre-scripted questions, but also questions from the participants. I see there's well over 130 of them. So a few of those have already come in, but please use the Q&A function to put in your questions. We'll be monitoring those and mixing those into the panel discussion as well. So just to reiterate, we have with us today Hector Webster with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Brandon Monk with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Matt Cheney with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, Katie Little with the California Farm Bureau, and also we have with us Dennis Orthmeyer with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So we'll start with a pre-scripted question. We heard Ari touch on this a little bit at the top of the hour. but I'd like to hear from the panelists on this as well. So different agencies and states may refer to wild pigs using different common names, including feral swine, wild boar, wild pig. Why is this a case? Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the background and history here? We could start maybe with either Hector or Brandon.
Sure, I can chime in. So feral is a fairly specific term that refers to a domestic animal that has gone back to the wild or has been released and is now free ranging in the wild. In California, I think starting in the 1700s, Spanish and Russian immigrants brought in domestic pigs, which then escaped and certainly started some populations in California, and then I think is in the early 1900s, Eurasian wild boar were introduced into California, and today's population is kind of a mix of both Eurasian wild boar and feral pigs. Domestic pigs are pretty easily returned to the wild, and they're smart and they're able to escape, and they go pretty quickly back to their wild roots. So I think a large chunk of the genetics is almost certainly from domestics. So that's why there's.
Cool, thanks, Brandon. Any other thoughts on that, or should we move on?
I just want to add that, basically the term feral, as you know, it occurs in other species, but feral is a term that refers to an animal or a group of animals that once were domesticated, then has since lost its domestic nature and became with the habits of or the behavior of being a wild animal.
That's a good point, Hector. Thank you. We'll move on to our next question. I think anyone in a group could answer this. This came in from a member of the public who is in the forum today. Since these animals are non-native to California, why have these animals not been completely eradicated, since they offset the natural balance of native animals and are moving into both residential and farming communities? So perhaps Matt, Katie, or Dennis, you could start us out on this question.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. It's sort of a complicated question because there's a lot of cultural and political factors that play in. But the short answer is they are very difficult to eradicate because they have such a high reproductivity rate that they're able to reproduce and spread very effectively. And because they're so intelligent, it is very hard to effectively trap them through time. So we end up seeing in a lot of places where we do try to effectively eliminate boar, what you end up with is selecting for boar that are pretty trap savvy and able to avoid being trapped and removed. So those are a couple of the reasons.
Great. Anyone else on our group panel want to weigh in on that question?
Brett, this is Dennis Orthmeyer. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So when you talk about eradication of a population, and it's not a localized eradication that you talk about, you would talk about eradication of feral pigs or wild pigs in all of California. The current tools that are available here, legal tools in California, shooting, trapping, are not sufficient for eradication. You would have to basically go to a toxicant to eradicate pigs, either in a big localized area or statewide. And currently there are no toxicants available for use in California. USDA Wildlife Service is working on a toxicant that will be sent over and tested. It's going to be sent to EPA for approval, sodium nitrite. But again, the current legislation, the way I understand it in California, is that there's no, it prevents toxicants to be used. But the only way to eradicate large groups of pigs is going to be a toxicant. It's just impossible to shoot your way out of this thing.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that as a quantitative ecologist. I mean, going back to my classes, remember, I mean, you'd have to be harvesting like more than 50% per year. So that would just be a really, really tall order. So good answers there.
And one more thing on that, Brett, just to quantify what you were saying, the current information on feral swine removal, you need to remove 70% of the pigs in an area just to remain stable population.
Good point. Good point. Okay, well, another question. This is actually from our prepared list, but I think it's a broad one that we would be good to address. What native species, including endangered, threatened, and sensitive, and habitats are most affected by wild pigs? So this might be something anyone could jump in on.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Definitely wetland specialist species, at least in my region, tend to have a pretty significant impact from boar because they are attracted to those wetland features where they, again, create those wallows and root. And typically in our region, a lot of those species happen to be more rare species because we've lost a lot of wetlands that used to historically be present. So that's my input.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Hector or Brandon?
But this is Dennis again. I think on one of my slides, upcoming slides, I do list all the, the potential species that could be, impacted. But, basically, if it's a game animal, a game bird, and it lays eggs, it's going to be impacted by pigs. So you got pheasants, quail, all the nesting species. And then I think Katie talked about the domestic animals, the sheep, the goats, those are all depredated by pigs. But it's pigs can have a huge impact on wild turkeys as well. Again, anybody that lays an egg is going to have issues with pigs.
Great, thank you. Speaking of Katie, I think I have one that you could give us some insight on. It's kind of an economic one. So there are several, and this is from the audience. So there are several estimates of damage caused by wild boar. One is over 3 years, $11 million, and $1.7 million during 1 year. Are there associated numbers of compensation actually paid to landowners or companies? And if so, who is making those payments? Are there government agencies like Department of Fish and Wildlife or the feds?
I do know that Fish and Wildlife does have a conflict fund that helps for issues with wildlife and kind of urban or obviously farms are obviously a little more rural conflict type programs, but I can't say that I know if they pay out directly for feral pig damages. Maybe someone at the department would be more expertise on whether the program actually does pay out specifically for that kind of damage. But to my knowledge, I have not heard of a feral pig specific compensation program.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I'm fairly new into this position. Do you know of anything, Brandon? Okay, yeah, he doesn't either. So this is something,
coming right out of the farmers' pockets, so.
Exactly. All right, well, let's move from economic back to health for another question. This is also from the public. And Hector, you might be able to help us with this also, Brandon. Is there any tracking data on the areas of the state most affected by pseudo-rabies?
Yeah, I believe that I replied that on the Q&A. disease surveillance regarding wild pigs is conducted by USDA Wildlife Services. We do get reports on that on the county basis. And that's available. Anybody, if you have access to the presentations of today, you can find in the presentation Dr. Monk just provided those maps, and those are pretty much the distribution of detections of pseudorabies across counties in California. I don't know, Dr. Monk, you want to extra comments on that?
Yeah, we don't have a true prevalence just because of how our sampling ability or wildlife services sampling ability. So being able to like quantify what areas are most affected by disease like pseudorabies is a difficult question to answer. The thing to remember is that pseudorabies, once it's detected in the population, it's going to stay in that population. There's just really not much else we can do. It's a herpes virus. It's going to stay in the animal, and the animal will likely be able to intermittently shed it. So it's a problem. We don't know how big of a problem it is or how little of a problem it is, but it's something to consider.
This seems to be a common theme in wildlife ecology. There's just so many things to monitor. We're always trying to catch up to monitor populations, diseases, impacts. So the more information we have, the better decisions we can make.
And in Florida, I think they're having more and more issues with pseudorabies in their Florida panthers, and it's likely from predating pigs with pseudorabies.
Okay. Yes.
Related to that question, do feral pigs or boar also vector or transmit anthrax?
What do our vets say about that?
They could. I don't think they're a large player though. Hector?
I agree with that. We haven't seen any reports on that, but definitely they could play a role on that.
Okay, well, here's a question that kind of goes a little bit more into kind of the crossover between the diseases and then how that might affect people and our industries and economics. So this is something that both the vets and I think Katie could answer, and it came in from the audience as well. Is there a food safety concern related to wild pig populations and ability to transfer pathogens to various animal populations to leafy greens? So either Katie or either of the vets, what do you think?
Well, I would certainly defer to the doctors on this because they, have certainly the expertise in the field and the education on it. But yeah, as I referred to in some of my slides, E. coli, the strain, and in the studies and all the literature I've been trying to, read on the wild pig and their impacts on the industry, as well as other parts, other industries in the state and just in general wildlife, again, as referred to in the slides before, they can trace the certain strains of E. coli to feral pig populations in the area, as well that those strains have gotten into livestock populations and the leafy greens in different row crops. So from the studies that I've read, they are able to trace that back to specific populations, and so it can be directly correlated.
And there's a bunch of other pathogens, not just E. coli, that potentially could be, reservoired, vectored, amplified in a population like in feral pigs, because they're hardy critters and they're such generalists that they potentially have exposure to lots of different habitats, lots of different things, garbage, etc. So their likely exposure to different pathogens is probably higher than a lot of other species. So I think it's a real good question, and one that we don't have a great answer to, except for stuff like E. coli and some other individual pathogens that folks have looked at.
I just want to echo what Dr. Monk and Katie said. Let the literature and all the reports and the literature shows that, wild pigs are known carriers of, major waterborne pathogens. And as Dr. Monk mentioned, they can contaminate, drinking water with E. coli, Campylobacter, Salmonella, Christoporidium, and Giardia. So those are some of the examples that wild pigs are known to be carriers of these bacteria and any other threats.
Thank you, Hector. Moving on to next question. What are your thoughts? What is a bigger concern? So humans moving pigs around, so translocation of pigs by people, or the natural expansion of wild pig populations? And so I think I'll start at the small scale with Matt on your thoughts, because you're managing a particular area of land, and then we can kind of move to the other speakers, their thoughts statewide. What are your thoughts? What do you see as in front of you, Matt?
Yeah, definitely getting back to the upcoming wildlife crossing projects. Our big concern is natural distribution of the pig population across those wildlife crossings, and then through more traditional avenues of dispersal. The nice thing about being on a peninsula is that we're pretty isolated, and so getting these boar finding their way onto the peninsula, they're a little bit limited in their means of dispersal. We don't have as much of an issue with people intentionally bringing boar in, because most of the peninsula doesn't actually allow hunting of any kind. And a lot of the times when people transport boar into new areas, that's typically the reason, as a hunting opportunity. So yeah, that's been my experience.
Any other thoughts from the other panelists, kind of at the statewide level? I don't know, maybe Brandon, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it depends on your perspective. In California, I think it's probably more of a natural dispersal, natural movement. But if you're, well north of the current distribution of feral pigs or wild pigs in North America, you're concerned about it moving on four wheels. And it's not just, for California, it's we also have had issues in the past with folks bringing pigs into California. It's relatively, that's probably less of a relative issue because we have pigs in all but 2 counties, but we don't really need to be adding to our population.
Any additional thoughts, Dennis?
Yeah, I have, well, I agree with Brandon. To me, it's a separate issue. Transport of pigs is yes, it happens, and they can go into unpopulated areas and spread pretty fast. But I think the natural expanding populations, and I would say the Bay Area seems to be one of the areas where we're seeing a huge increase in the number of pigs in urban areas, and working with and trying to remove, I'm sorry, we call them feral swine out of urban areas is difficult, but we can do that. So it's the areas where there's no hunting and no pressure on pigs, they just expand. Like you said, somebody said 3 or 4 litters a year. So transport of pigs occurs, and it's just people are moving pigs illegally, and it's for hunting purposes. So I think the natural expansion is more of an issue.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and I've seen this question actually come up a few times in the chat. There is some questions about a potential disease affecting wild pigs in the Monterey County area. Does anyone know anything about that? that you could fill us in on? And, you know, so do populations go up and down with the pigs as well due to disease? And do you know about some sort of outbreak affecting pigs in the Monterey County area?
I saw Dr. Webster's response, and I agree. I've had no word of it. I just reached out to the biologist in that area, and he hasn't had any. He's unaware of anything. So I don't know. Certainly the populations will rise and fall, but the best of my knowledge, nope, nobody's brought us any pigs to look at.
And I want to second that. Well, I want to say that our main goal in the wild pig population, we want to encourage people to let us know if there are any death incidents or mortality events. Our concern is to monitor for African swine fever. That's one of the goals right now at the national level, that African swine fever has been incorporated recently to the testing of in wild pigs. So we haven't heard of any events associated to incidents of diseases in wild pigs in California in that magnitude as a pandemic or outbreak in wild pigs. Certainly, if you know of anything, let us know. Let USDA Wildlife Services and USDA regulatory officials and state animal health officials.
Great. Well, I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but we had times for some pretty interesting questions, and kind of, at least from where I'm sitting, I heard kind of a takeaway point, like there's a lot of questions that we could have more information for, and that would be helpful moving forward on how to, what the solutions might be. So back to you, Melissa.
Great job. Thank you, Brett. Yeah, no, some really good conversation. A huge thank you to our presenters and panelists. For those who maybe are not familiar with these folks, at the end of the agenda, the last 3 pages do include bios for each of our panelists and participants today, both for this panel and for the panel that we'll have right after the break. So feel free to check that out there. We are going to take just a short break, probably about 6 minutes. I have 10:14 at the moment. I want to come back at about 10:20. And when we come back, we're going to have a speaker and panelist discussion about potential solutions to wild pigs here in California. I know I've seen a lot of questions coming in over the Q&A specifically to that panel. So that will be a great conversation as well. So we'll see everyone back here at 10:20. Ari, I think you may want to change the time. Thank you. Do we still have Dennis with us? Looking for Dennis Orthmeyer.
I'm not sure what happened. I don't see him in the list.
He was having computer issues. That's why I was asking,
Hmm.
because he was trying to address his audio and video issues. Did he end up in the participant list?
I don't see him there either.
Sorry, I didn't mean a participant, attendees. Get my nomenclature straight.
Yeah.
Okay. And I see some phone numbers, but I don't recognize any of those as Dennis's. All right, our next speaker, sorry folks for the delay, it's about 10:23. Our next speaker was having some computer issues. I know he's working on those, trying to get them taken care of. And let's give him just another minute. See if he can get through. All right, I think we have him. Dennis, I'm promoting you. There he is. Congratulations, Dennis. Looks like you made it back over. We have you unmuted at this end, but we can't hear you. Dennis, can you hear us? Dennis?
There we go. I think your sound might be working now. Maybe he can't hear us.
All right, can you hear me now?
There we go.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay.
I'm
You're
having
back.
a wonderful day.
It sounds like you've really had a challenging time with technology this morning. I'm sorry about that, Dennis.
Yeah, everything worked just fine yesterday, last night, and everything. But today, I am not being successful. But
Well, that's how technology works.
all right, hold on. We're going to try one more time here. I got my camera on, and I'd probably break the camera anyway. So.
All right. Well, if you are ready, Dennis, I'd like to introduce Dennis Orthmeyer, who's with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services, which was mentioned several times during the first panel and some of the Q&A. And so Dennis is going to share a little bit with us about Wildlife Services and their experience with wild pig. You ready to go, Dennis?
Let's put it up. We'll see what we can do.
Okay, I'm going to hit share.
All right. Good morning. Dennis Orthmeyer. I'm the State Director for Wildlife Services, and we have over close to 100 employees in the state working as wildlife specialists, wildlife biologists across the state. We do agricultural protection, working in cooperative counties. We do work on 24 or 26 airports in the state, providing protection for airstrikes, and then we do like $1.7 million worth of contracted to work on endangered species projects across the state, protecting endangered species, removing mammals and birds that are impacting them. So next slide. All right, so my slides were, I haven't seen this direction of the slide, so you're going to have to, I'm just going to have to go with it. So Wildlife Services we have 4 major areas of focus across the United States, and it's agriculture, human health and safety, property protection, and natural resource protection. And this particular talk it goes in concert with what Katie was saying, is that, you know, we work with pigs that are damaging, you know, row crops of corn, wheat, soybean, peanuts, rice, leafy greens across California. In pastures, damage to pastures or grasses and desired species encourages weed growth and invasive species to come in when you have damage in the pastures. Horticultures, we term this damage horticulture, which, you know, when you're working in orchards such as almonds this time of year or just before harvest, pigs will go into the almond fields and stand on their back legs and break off the branches that are low hanging just to get to the almonds. And it's, you know, severe damage in those areas. And you could probably figure out, you know, the money aspect of this. And then we, you know, work in removing pigs from carrot fields, nuts, grapes. As the sugars go up, the pigs move in towards the grape fields. And then we had an interesting incident of feral swine getting into a blueberry field and causing over $1 million worth of damage. So next slide, please. Oh, there it is. Estimated 1.5 billion annual damage, and that number is low across the United States. It's, you know, that's an older number, and they're looking at somewhere around 2.2 billion dollars of annual damage in the United States just from feral swine. Go ahead. This so this is a picture of some satellite movements of feral swine marked in on the Tejon Ranch, and you can see the dispersed areas on the lower part of the slide of the movements of the pig up and on the Tejon Ranch, moving through the hills and through the property up there. But of significance is the top left corner, which was a pistachio field. And this pig took, you know, evening forays down to the pistachio field every night and cause damage, and then would move back up into the Tejon Ranch. So they do have significant impact on the orchard type areas. Go ahead. And through, and this is property damage. And so they destroy lawns, gardens, ornamental plantings, trees, damage to residential areas, golf courses, parks, mid-pen for specifically cemeteries and beaches. The slide on the left is the result of a feral pig in a state park that got trapped into the restroom and just destroyed the whole restroom. And on the right, that's just feral swine, rooting for grubs right outside a resident of a house. The next slide. And then this is, damage to natural resource areas. When you have, state parks and you have county parks and, you have national parks that, feral swine are in there all the time. The part of, the natural resources is, they get in and on the lower left, they get into the sensitive areas, these sensitive riparian areas, and do the wallowing. And so they have a huge impact on the riparian areas when they go in there, because that's where most of the sensitive plants are. Go ahead. And so as the slide says, there's 72 rare, threatened, endangered plants in high impact pig range. So, it's going to be on the west side in the central part of of California where the high density pigs are, but there's, a lot of threatened endangered plants, especially in these sensitive areas that down in the riparian areas. Go ahead. This is the natural resources. So this is, at cemeteries, and one of the things that the greater that concern, but also in tribal areas, they go into the sensitive tribal areas that, are very, very coastal, and they'll do the same kind of damage there. Go ahead.
Hey,
This is.
Hey, Ines, can I interrupt for 1 second? I was hoping we could really move on to solutions in this section, and we have a limited amount of time. So, any chance you can jump ahead to kind of the solution thing? Because we've talked a lot about disease and damage they've done, but
okay, that's my slides were realigned, so I'm sure they can page down to them because there was a solution section.
Let's go right to that if you don't mind. Thank you.
Sure. Good to see you. Damage management. Okay. That's just a statement about where and what about pig populations, and we can get it sets up the discussion. So here's the okay. You can go to the next slide. So this is where the principles of control management is. This is where you start trying to figure out pig solutions. To have and control pigs, you have to have access. You have to determine and remove, the refugee areas. There's areas that, that pigs go to, and, and there's nobody bothering them. And then they will leave that refugee area to go out and feed in different areas. Methods, we'll discuss methods. One thing about pigs is they respond to pressure. If you don't want pigs on your property, all you got to do is apply pressure. It can be hunting, it can be just, harassing, pigs. But, it all takes time, and it takes communication with your neighbors and with, different, the legal authorities. So go ahead. All right, so the legal methods of control in California for pig solutions, hunting license, you can have personal hunts, guided hunts, the share program. These are ways to control pigs. Depredation permits are the way Wildlife Services works on removing feral swine, and then the landowner counter law. Those are the three major areas. The hunting purposes and working on landowner and counter laws, those are usually, they're hunting, and like I said previously, if you have an expanding population of pigs and you want to reduce it, we're not going to shoot our way out of controlling pigs in California, because it's just impossible to remove 70% of the population annually to control pigs. So go ahead. So it comes down to methods of take, what you have to take into account. how much time you want to invest, the effort that you're going to invest, and the cost of such a thing. And we do that all the time, working just on the depredation aspect of it, because we know it takes time, we know it takes effort, but and the costs are part of what Wildlife Services, does. We carry the cost of that, and it's expensive, but the effort is there. If we can get there and we can get a corral trap up and larger, and we try to remove, build it big enough to remove the sounder, which may have, a sounder may be up to 20 pigs, build our traps to catch 20 pigs at a time type of thing. So go ahead, next slide. So this is, one of the traps. This is a rooter gate, smaller trap in a smaller area, but this is, one of the things to, the major way to control larger number of pigs. Go ahead. Now this is supposed to be a video, and this trap is called a pig brig, and the netting on it is wrapped up, and this is just the end result of a small group of pigs that were caught, and it shows you the strength, and we're finding that we like this because the net is up, and the pigs go in for the thing, and then the net drops, and it's a better way to catch larger number of pigs because they can come in from all sides. They don't have to go through a gate. Go ahead. You'll have to hit it again. And we also have a drop net that we used early on. We like using this. Again, you can see how they can come in from all sides. They gather in the middle, and it just drops right on top of them. And the netting, you don't think the netting is going to hold, but it's pretty significant, strong, and it works pretty good. Go ahead. This particular slide is we're working in the Bay Area at a landfill, removing pigs. The pigs in the landfill were were not afraid of humans, and the landfill said that the pigs were coming up and standing and moving next to the employees, and it was just a public safety issue. So they asked us to get started in removing pigs, and we've been there for about 3 or 4 years. And this is one of the areas that we're doing additional research on and sampling these pigs. And we're looking at different pathogens and trying to determine, we're very concerned about landfills and where the particles of food that come into the landfills, if they come in from airplanes, if they come in from come through ports and stuff like that, because we're really concerned about ASF coming in, and being that it's so prevalent in China, we have many airplanes coming over from China, and there's foodstuffs and food particles coming from airplanes and from the ports coming in. So we're sampling these pigs and checking for multiple pathogens coming in. Go ahead. All right. Sometimes we're not effective in keeping all the pigs, and it's just a reminder that trapping is not not the full-time answer, and sometimes we don't get them all. Go ahead. All right, solutions for urban pigs. I mentioned it earlier. In the Bay Area, Santa Clara County, pigs are increasing, and they're moving into urban areas. And the most significant one that we're working on is the landfill. So the pigs come down through urban areas into the landfill to feed, and they go back through the urban areas, the cities, and then there's an area of that there's a refugia, there's an open space area they're up there. So it's something that we're working on, and we're more concerned about access and impact to humans and contact with humans on this. So we're working to get a better idea how to deal with these pigs. Go ahead. And that must be it.
Yep, that was it.
Okay, so it's a much shorter presentation that I sent over there, but the solutions that we have for pigs are limited, but can be effective. Using corral traps is a big one. We do a lot of night shooting with our night vision scopes, and that's very effective. One of our specialists got 60 pigs in one night using just using night vision scopes. So it's a real good methods. Day shooting, you can do day shooting, but most of the time the best way is the corral traps right now.
Yeah, I just
there's other options.
I just want to say thank you for getting to that. Really appreciate and sorry to have interrupted before, but that last section was really helpful. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and there's a couple, there's a couple other methods that are out there that, I didn't discuss, but, aerial control of pigs is used heavily in other states. And it could be used effectively here in California in certain places. But the traditional status of pigs being a game mammal is, it's illegal to use, aerial control on pigs because it's a game mammal. So at this point, anyhow, from what I understand.
Okay. All right, Dennis, thank you so much. I understand you also are going to join our next panel. And so I want to introduce Taylor Williams, who's with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And Taylor's going to moderate this next panel, and I'll let her introduce her panelists.
Thank you, Melissa. Today we are joined on the panel by Roger Baldwin from UC Davis, Chris Lopez, the Rural County Representatives of California, Dennis, who you guys just heard from, Dana Page from Santa Clara County Parks, Dan Scalos from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Chris Stutz, also from California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So thank all of you for joining us today. We have quite a few questions queued up, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. One of the first questions we have, and Dennis, this might be suited for you following up on that presentation, but it says state eradication is unlikely and not a current management goal in California, but is eradication of local wild pig populations feasible? How much does hunting contribute to the overall management of wild pigs?
So I would agree, state eradication of pigs is, not something that's going to be feasible in anybody's lifetime here in California. Local eradication can be done. We participated in a eradication of feral swine in San Diego County, and it proved effective. And at this point, the only way that we feel pigs can get back into San Diego County is if somebody transport them down there, is my opinion. So.
Awesome. Kind of following up on San Diego, we had a question come in talking about some of the pigs down in SoCal and in San Diego in particular. It says that they still have a population in the Santa Ana riverbed. Hunting used to be open down there, but as the person who's sending the question and understands, it was closed due to equestrian people fearing injury of their horses. Does anyone know why it would not be reopened, at least to archery hunting, or does anyone on the panel have any comments on that?
And that seems like a really regional specific or area specific question that perhaps we can follow up with that individual after the forum and see if we can get them connected with someone.
Awesome. All right, so switching gears just a little bit. Chris, I have a question that I think you might be able to answer. Would considering a bounty on pigs, almost as an incentive to hunters, help reduce the number of wild pigs? Is
Chris Stutes or Chris Lopez? You've got a couple, Chris.
Sorry, Chris Stutes. Is that something that the department could consider?
Under current classification as big game, there's several barriers to doing any kind of a bounty or reward, or even there's even some types of issues related to the other commentaries related to paying for pigs, for pig hunts and things like that. So there's definitely barriers, and nothing in current statute that allows any kind of mechanism such as that.
And I would add, just jumping in here, bounties have typically not worked well when it comes to managing any number of pest species. One of the problems with bounties is that there's always an incentive to maintain some of that population out there to continue to bring in that revenue source for the individual who's involved in collecting those bounties. So that's generally not been a successful strategy when it comes to managing a lot of these types of species.
Great feedback. Thank you. We have another question that I actually think I may be able to help with. It says most wild pigs are found on private land, which is mostly leased out at prices most hunters cannot afford. Are any programs being expanded to increase hunting opportunities for the average hunter? Or are there good areas to hunt wild pigs on public land? I do know that our share program through CDFW is always accepting applications from landowners, and you can apply for hunts on share properties through our online licensing portal. So there are opportunities on private land through the share program. Is there anyone on the panel, maybe Dan, would you like to add on public areas that you can hunt? I know you're a hunter.
So the public area thing is pretty tough. I mean, Dennis's last few slides teed that up real well. My personal experience is exactly, I mean, his outline was almost perfect. What pigs are on public properties aren't there for long. I feel like I've never hunted quarry where such little pressure pushes them off of public property. Things like deer and turkeys, you've got to, first couple of weeks, it's usually really good. After that, things sort of move off under refugia. Pigs, I feel like it's one shot and they're off, and there just isn't a lot out there, honestly. When you get back into the private lands thing, like you were mentioning with share, I just want to point out here, there's only 2 properties currently enrolled in share. Victoria is always looking for more. The demand for those hunts is very high. The Lake Berryessa hunt, for example, there's 7 hunt periods between August the 28th through December. Early on, there's not a lot of big application bias or pressure for those, only about 39 apps. But when you get into December, when the hunting tends to be good, the rain's there, the cold and all that stuff is pushing the pigs around, she's up around 900 applications for just a couple of hunts. So very sought after. Another property down in Tulare County, only a couple of hunt periods, but they're getting 400 to 500 applications for those. So we know that they're popular. It's just getting the landowners, to engage.
Dan, you're muted.
Dan, we lost your audio.
Dan, can you hear us?
I'm not sure what happened there.
You're unmuted at this end. It was bizarre, Dan. Quite honestly, you were talking and then suddenly you just went quiet.
The same exact thing happened during, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, the same exact thing happened to me the other day during the commission meeting.
Yes.
I started talking and all of a sudden I look down and everybody's waving their hands and they can't hear. But anyway, sorry, my computer mic just cut out and my speakers actually were muted. So I'm not sure how much of that you heard, but we only have a couple of properties in share. It's a high demand deal. Talking to Victoria, who runs a share program, Victoria Barr. When it comes to pigs and deer, those would be stuff that she would pursue aggressively. So any landowner contacts that can be sent to her, she would absolutely follow them up.
Awesome. Well, all the landowners out there, if you want to apply for share, now you know where to go. Okay, Chris Stutz, I have another question for you. It says, I have been told you are the contact person for regulatory petition 2021-007, a petition having to do with increasing method of take for wild pig to include big bore BB devices or air guns. As the petition is at CDFW awaiting CDFW recommendation to Fish and Game Commission. Will this petition be given a recommendation of some sort prior to the October meeting?
Yeah, enforcement did a legal assessment on the petition and forwarded feedback to the wildlife branch, who, at least from what I saw in the chat for an earlier answer, will have an update at the October meeting. And it looks like Scott Gardner would like to add.
Yeah, you got it right, Chris. I wasn't sure if you had that update, but yeah, we're going to give you an update on that. We have, I think there's 3 or 4 petitions that address air guns, and we're going to give an update to the commission in October about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And thanks, Chris. So moving around a little bit, does anyone on the panel know, are there any reproduction disruption oral baits out there?
This is Dennis. I've seen nothing from our research center on reproduction stoppage. Like Gonacon for horses and deer, I don't think it's been established for pigs.
Okay, Dana, did you want to give that a shot too?
Well, I can second that through my research, I've reached out to Texas A&M, where they're developing a pig specific contraceptive and some other options, but none of those are at any level of testing on a larger landscape scale in California or Texas at this time.
Gotcha. Okay, so it says many hunters are fundamentally opposed to the use of toxins, as was demonstrated by a defeat of anti-pig poisons in Texas a while back. Do people think or feel that hunters would support a widespread use of poisons, since most hunters don't support a widespread, or don't support poisoning? Sorry. Dana, do you want to give it a shot?
From my perspective, in general, toxins are not advised on any level, just because of their potential to move into other animals and through the food web. However, doing research on the sodium nitrate option as a toxin, the sodium nitrate is probably one of the better options, because pigs that ingest this at the low dose, it won't kill them, and they'll carry on. And then pigs that do eat it at a high dose will die, and then it breaks down in the body, so that as they venture out and die, in whatever area they are, if they get predated upon by vultures and the scavengers, that sodium nitrate no longer exists and will not poison the scavengers of that carcass. So I think that's probably one of the leading things. And then thinking back to the contraceptive to kind of close that loop, I think that's going to be one of the tools in the tool belt that inevitably is going to help control the population, but it's just not there yet. So I kind of cut it short. But I think anyone that manages feral pigs, wild pigs, that's going to be one of the options, but it's just a matter of fine tuning and getting that to a level that it's appropriate for other animals in the ecosystem and the pigs. And I have this crazy thing about facial recognition and making it specific to pigs, right? So that when pigs come up to the thing that dispenses it, it will only dispense it to pigs. So let's use technology to our advantage. That's a ways.
That's
Yeah,
an interesting
Taylor,
concept.
if I could jump in there, Chris Lopez. So I'm representing RCRC today, which is the Rural County Representatives of California, but I'm a county supervisor in Monterey, and I'm a hunter myself. And one of the major issues I think we'd have here on the Central Coast with any of those methods is the question of how it would impact zero-take animals that we have, such as the California condor, which we put a lot of investment into preserve here on the Central Coast, flying between Pinnacles and Big Sur. And we also happen to be a hotspot for large animals, including wild pigs. And so with that sort of nexus here on the Central Coast, I think we'd get a lot of concern and need for additional research to push us to a point where that's really an option, just because there is that potential to take a zero-take animal like a California condor.
And just to add a little bit more to it too, I mean, the sodium nitrite, one of the real benefits of it is that you are eliminating a lot of that potential for secondary exposure risk with this particular toxicant, as opposed to some of the other potential options that have been looked at out there. One of the bigger hurdles, though, of course, is trying to eliminate access to non-target species from direct consumption. And that's where a lot of the research at NWRC, National Wildlife Research Center, which is the research branch of Wildlife Services, has been involved in. They've put a lot of time and effort into developing some of these delivery mechanisms, the hoppers and whatnot, that are designed to allow access specifically to, hopefully just pigs. Bears continue to be a problem, though. I think a pig can get into, a bear can get into too. So that's always going to be a potential hurdle, particularly here in California, where we have lots of areas where we have bears. If we're dealing with areas where you don't have bears, then, I think some of those hopper devices are probably going to be more applicable. But maybe, I don't know, Dennis, do you want to chime in a little bit about, the development of the hopper, since it's really a Wildlife Services issue that's been pushing this agenda?
Yeah, and Dennis, if you want to say it in just a couple seconds, because we do have some more questions queued up too.
So I'll be brief on this. Is that from my understanding is that the sodium nitrate will not impact the bears, because the pigs have this, and it just it's more a very specific predator specific toxicant from my understanding, and I don't think it's going to impact bears from my end. But I know we're moving through and getting ready, probably another year or so, taking it to EPA for to have it set up as a legal toxicant. So
awesome. Thank you all for that awesome discussion. That was great. Our next question is, how would a shift in classification from game to non-game influence control efforts, given the need for more than hunting changes? And another question we can kind of loop in with that we got was, if the status of pigs was changed from a game species to a pest species, would that open up more control options for us aside from just hunting? Any takers on that one?
Well,
I'll tell you this as a hunter, as somebody who's been out, at the request of ranchers, on their property to help with the population. I'm still buying my tags. They don't like to go through the depredation process, and obviously I'm an elected official. I'm going to do everything I have to do to stay on the right side of legal. And as I do that and buy my 3-4 tags for the day, I end up in situations where I see 25, 30 pigs and have an opportunity to take more, but I stop. Right, I take what I have my legal tags for and go through that process, and then that's the end of it. I think a change in classification would give that opportunity on that property, given the situation, that's specifically proximity to vineyards at time of harvest, to allow for that, but without going through that other procedure. But in terms of getting the additional permit, but without that, those opportunities are lost, even on the hunting side. I know the question asked about moving beyond hunting, but even in that scenario, there would be additional opportunity.
Yeah, and I would chime in too, from a limited term perspective, when it comes to protecting resources. I think that there could be benefits to considering them essentially a pest species, because you're able to take more animals. You're able to apply more pressure, like Dennis was talking about. in a short-term concerted effort, which could drive them out of those areas where you're having those potential problems. Now, is it going to substantially reduce populations, regionally or statewide? Well, probably not, particularly given the reproductive output of pigs. But I do think you could see some benefits as far as protecting resources from that kind of change.
Awesome. Kind of going along those lines of just different options for controlling, does anyone know what other states are doing to control wild pig populations? Dana, I know you mentioned some research with Texas A&M. Are you familiar with any other research projects that have been going on anywhere else?
I can't necessarily touch on what specifically they're doing in other states. Maybe people can, but my management goals differ from, so I work at a regional county park district. We have public lands that do not allow hunting. So depredation is generally not an option. It can be one of the tools. So kind of where my mind goes to in that urban interface is we've all basically agreed we're never going to be able to completely eliminate the pig population from California. So what I'm doing is working with people like Matt Cheney from Mid-Penn, the Water District, homeowners, and looking at overall integrated pest management approach. So not just depredation, but Pinnacle's great example of using physical barriers to keep them out of sensitive areas. A lot of our rural urban parks with grass get rooted from the pigs. So I'm working with maintenance staff to put nematodes and treat with these non-toxic things so that the pigs are no longer attracted to the grass fields. Also education, updating our food lockers, because one of our biggest problem in the campgrounds is a public safety concern as pigs have become acclimated to the food sources in those campgrounds. So, enforcement and education on that side. So those are just kind of some of the tools that I've been using at specifically in mind. But as far as getting that population down until we have a toxin or a birth control, or for me, I don't have necessarily a means of depredation on the public land. So I kind of have to think outside of the box.
I was going to call on you, Dennis.
So for the major control tool used outside of California and in the big pig states, so like Oklahoma, Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, the whole Southeast, is aerial control. They use helicopters they're turbine helicopters, and they work in large open areas. And for instance, I know like in Texas, when they start working on pigs, they move out through the wheat fields, and they start behind the pigs that are moving out, and they just remove the pigs coming up one at a time through out of the whole sounder. And I've been there and experienced them removing 2,600 pigs in a week via helicopter in open grain fields. So aerial control is a very effective tool being used around the rest of the United States. But it is not being used here in California because, you can't use aerial on any kind of aerial control or aerial shooting of game mammal. And
Taylor, can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Just quickly, Dennis, so you mentioned, you had an example where 2,600 pigs in one roundup. Do you know what they do with those pigs afterwards?
It depends on the property that they're working on. And, a lot of times they're left laying, and sometimes they're have to be retrieved and then taken to, provided to landowner, or taken to specific areas for burial type of thing. So it varies. It varies on the property.
And I would add, so every state deals with things a little bit differently, and Texas is one of the few states, maybe the only state, I don't know, there might be others, that have the capability of taking animals to slaughter facilities, very specific registered slaughter facilities. I'm guessing they have to be taken alive, but I don't know that for sure. So it may be possible to take some that have been shot and to get processed as well. But that's a way that the landowner can recoup some of the loss, is by taking those animals in. And also just building on how, you know, other states deal with things. You know, a lot of states, pigs are definitely considered a pest species, and in many states they don't allow hunting of pigs because they found, you know, Tennessee being a great example, pigs used to be only found in the Smokies, and then they opened it up to hunting, and all of a sudden pigs started popping up all over the state because people were transporting them around for hunting opportunities. And so other states kind of learned from that and took their cues from that, and they really don't allow hunting. Basically, if pigs are there, they have people designated to go out and remove those pigs. So there's definitely a lot of different ways for how these states are dealing with this particular issue.
So Roger, to answer your question about taking pigs to slaughter facilities and having processed, they have to be taken in alive, and they have to be tested for diseases before they're slaughtered. And that's one of the questions that we run into quite often, you know, working in depredation, in a large depredation event, is that, you know, that people want to have these things donated to, you know, like to, you know, care homes and to everything else. And there's seems to be a drawing line. I mean, if you're going to have if there is a Pigs Unlimited dinner, right? That or maybe Ducks Unlimited dinner or whatever California wants, you know, those pigs can be provided to that, because dead pigs can be provided to that, or they can be provided to the landowner. We like to give them to the landowner, and that's very successful. But for large number of pigs to be donated for public use, then they have to be captured and taken, transported live. And there is a slaughter facility here in California. I think, Hector, is it? And is it down in, I don't know if Hector's still on, but I think it's down near Southern California someplace, that would take wild pigs alive.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I didn't know that was an opportunity in California, at least in certain areas.
I think that there's a slaughter facility down there. In
It looks like Hector took his mic off. Hector, do you want to clarify that?
It might be under the approval of the state veterinarian. I know that it's illegal to slaughter wild pigs, feral pigs. Under approval, I would say so.
Well, thank you for that clarification. And thank you guys for the great conversation around all of that, what other states are doing, and different management practices that we, you know, maybe can look at and learn from. But we had a question come in asking if genetics can be used to create a toxin for European pigs. And also, just out of curiosity, do feral pigs mate with European pigs? Do the pigs really know the difference? Dennis, do you know the answer to that?
So a genetic specific toxin to pigs, and it would probably, be like developing a species specific toxin, is, from my understanding, is not under development, and it would take a long time to get that. I mean, the sodium nitrate is going to be very, very specific to feral pigs. And the other part of the second part of the question, what was that again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Do feral pigs breed with European pigs?
Oh, absolutely. And there is certain areas that have domestic pigs that release them to be bred by feral swine, as they feel it brings in a stronger gene to the pig growing, and it provides a better taste when mated with a wild pig or wild boar. And yeah, there are places that have free roaming pigs, and that's a specific purpose for it.
That's very interesting. Thank you. In regards to the 2018 Farm Bill, it authorized feral swine program that provided funding to states to deal with feral swine issues. This says here that California received little funding versus other states in proportion to the economic and environmental impacts that we face here. Does anyone know, or why do you think it is that we received less money? And is CDFW advocating for the continuance of the feral swine program and for more funding to California?
That's a Dennis question.
So, well, I can't answer for the department if they, support that, or if they were actively engaged in it. The mechanism that I had to work with is I worked with the National NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, USDA, that they were, we were supposed to work in cooperation and find localized ranchers, farmers, landowners that wanted to participate in an eradication project. We could not locate anybody. There was some discussion about a vineyard may or may not be interested in it. And then once they learned the techniques that we'd be using, they felt that they did not want to engage because it would, impact the people coming up tasting wines to see, corral traps and, people with rifles shooting pigs, while they're tasting wine was just, they didn't think that was probably going to be good for their business. So we did not participate in any of the Farm Bill funding.
Roger, did you have anything to add to that, or you just wanted to throw it all on Dennis?
No, I really didn't know. I knew Dennis would be the appropriate person to address that one too.
Awesome. Well, I have another question, and I'm not sure who can answer this one, but do we expect any impacts from the extended drought to impact the wild pig population in any way?
I'd say that we're seeing a lot more interaction in the suburban areas on the fringe of the WUI, the wildland-urban interface, especially in vineyards this year. I'm hearing anecdotally from a lot of my farmers that the chewing on drip tape is insane, especially in vineyards. The amount of losses are significant because of that in food safety around those folks who are along the foothills and edges here in Monterey County. And so that's part of the overall problem, right? And that drought is pushing the pigs out of the hills down towards human life, where they can find a wet grass that they can uproot and still find those grubs more easily than they can up in the hills at this point. We did see our first rain here, about 5 inches up in the watershed last week, and so we're hopeful that that's going to help ameliorate some of that problem. But big picture, yes, when the drought is going, we definitely see skinnier runts. We see a lot less healthy pig population, and they are more willing to interact with humans, or at least get close, as even with dogs. And we see some of that interaction as well in stories back of dogs with tusk in their side. So yeah, definitely an impact from drought and then the rain as well.
Yeah, pigs are extremely water dependent, so they need water.
Yeah, up to about a week ago, we were using water in our corral traps for bait, and it was working pretty effective until the rain came here.
Roger, a follow-up question for that. Do you see an increase in human wildlife conflict when we're in a drought?
So I hear less about it with pigs than I do with, say, with bears or something like that. But I mean, it certainly makes sense. I mean, they're, like I said, they're extremely water dependent. They have to have it. It's going to bring them down into these, human use areas like Chris was talking about. So, I mean, it stands to reason that you would have an increase in conflict situations in those kind of scenarios.
That is very understandable. Dennis, I have another question that I think you can answer. Because we have different active tests and studies being done on pigs, for hunters, is there a place for them to take their harvest for testing, and then can they take their harvest home afterwards?
So when we're testing pigs. We need to have, we're doing it serologically, so we need the blood of the pig to conduct all the tests that we run on pigs. So having a pig that is already dead, probably having been had the offal removed, we're not going to be able to test that pig for any of the diseases because one, the blood coagulates really quickly. The one thing about it is that when we do our testing in the counties, we provide that information to the Ag Commissioner of the county if we come up with whatever, the pigs that we take opportunistically through depredation permits, and we do sample them, and if they come back with a positive swine brucellosis or something, we let the Ag Commissioner know. So they could call the county Ag Commissioner before they go hunting and say, okay, do we have pigs with swine brucellosis in the county, that type of thing, and that would be able to inform them, but we can't individually test a pig.
Thank you for that. And then I have another good question. We've had some questions about tags. So Chris Stutz, I might lean towards you on this one. Currently, what is the tag limit for pigs? And then given the prevalence of the species and the associated damage, why isn't the tag limit any higher? Why are they limited?
I don't know what the department or rulemaking decision point was for changing the pigs tags from 5 to 1, but currently it's one tag, 1 pig. A lot of the questions in the chat, including the things about how classification would change, a lot of the questions related to classification change, to tag numbers, fees, all those things are answered in the legislative bill, which I can't comment on. I can tell people that a lot of their answers can be found in there, including questions related to alternative methods, how changes in classification would expand, ways in which pigs are harvested. All that stuff would be impacted by the classification change from big game, methods of take, etc.
Yeah, I might add, Chris, that it's all spelled out in the legislation. We're going to know in the next 7 days whether or not that's law or not, and that'll be the jumping off point. Obviously, the timing was just a little off. If we'd had this meeting in a week, then we'd be able to start talking about it as law. And then there's of course regulatory work that has to happen, but we'll know soon enough. And this is going to, I wanted to reiterate that I said at the beginning, this is not going to be a fast process. As we see even more today from this discussion, it's a complicated problem, and solutions are complicated. But all the different pieces matter, and so we'll know soon enough. And by the time we talk about this at the Fish and Game Commission meeting in October, we'll be able to talk about that with some more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sklar, for adding that in. Melissa, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to say, if you have any more questions, we probably have time for one more, and then we're going to move over to participant comments.
Yes, we were on the same page. So my last question is, has anyone ever thought about possibly using the revenue generated by the sale of pig tags to be used in offsetting any type of environmental impacts, including depredation or anything like that? Dana.
If I could do that, of course. I think anyone that works for any agency, and obviously because we cannot hunt on public lands, but there's always been this back talk of like, and I saw in some of the comments that Ari had talked about state parks and hunting in state parks. So there's kind of always been this idea of opening up parks for certain days, just allow for hunting. And obviously that revenue could be used to offset the ecological damage and the damages that we see. But for me, I currently have no way to make that legally happen. So those processes are very bureaucratic and slow. So I have hope that that could be in the future.
Chris,
I
you have
think we have
something to
to,
add?
yeah, I think we have to remember that it's a zero-sum game, meaning that as this money comes in now, it goes to great programs as well that are mostly directed by our here, at least here in Monterey County, by our Fish and Game Commission through recommendation to our Board of Supervisors. So if that money is pulled from that particular pot, it's going elsewhere. And it's one of those push-pulls and what programs fall behind. Specifically, we tend to fund a lot of hatchery projects, deer projects, and then those go away if we're taking this funding that's currently in the stream out of that stream. And so it is a bigger question of push-pull, right? But there are questions about the potential new regulations and how that might impact overall, as well as we're considered one of the three counties in the Golden Triangle that is a big destination for pig hunters who come here as a destination to hunt with guides. And so we might see impact on all ends. And I think any reduction in that funding stream is going to have an impact to other programs within our counties.
Yeah, I might add that whether under the current law or if there's a new law in place soon, most of the money from tags is going to the big game fund, and as was just said, it's a zero-sum game on that. And I think there's been some assurance that we won't reduce the programs that are under the big game fund if this bill passes. So this will require new funding. But we saw that the enormous amount of damage pigs cause, and so I think there'll be once we have a plan in place that actually makes sense and can work, we'll have to look for funding for it. But I feel confident that we'll find that funding. I think the indication of how the SB 856 passed, unanimously in both houses is an indication that people are aware of this. And again, I want to, commend Senator Dodd when he was introduced to this. When I introduced this to him 7 or 8 years ago, he was like, "What, pigs?" And he's testified at a number of these hearings about what he's learned, and I think he's then therefore educated his colleagues, for folks who may not have seen these problems before, about how big a problem it is, which has been really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Any more comments? If not, I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Great.
Right.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Appreciate your moderation of the panel. I appreciate our panelists. Hopefully you all can stick around, and would also invite our other panelists from earlier this morning to join by video if they would like to. As we move into the participant comment portion of the meeting, there may be some questions, in which case we might go to our panelists to see if we can get some of those answered. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we move into this. We're going to open the queue for comments from our participants. If you do still have some questions, you're welcome to continue to send those over through the Q&A. Ari and Vicki will continue answering those questions as we go through this process. So if you wish to make a comment, use the raise hand button in Zoom to raise your hand, and please keep it raised. If you're participating on your computer, that button is located down at the bottom of the window and also at the bottom of the participant list. And you may have to hover your pointer over the Zoom window for that row of options to appear. On the mobile app, that raise hand is located at the bottom of the screen. If you're on the phone only, so this is for our handful of folks who are on the phone and you want to speak, press *9 on your phone once to raise your hand. Only once. Because if you press it twice, you take yourself out of the queue. So press *9 once, that'll put you in the queue, and I will call you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Once you raise your hand, again, please don't lower it. We will do that for you after you speak. Please listen carefully for your name to be called. When it's your turn to speak, we will change the Zoom settings to open your mic, but you may also need to unmute yourself at your end. And another thing, please don't change your name and your display name on Zoom once you've raised your hand, because we'll lose you in the list of names when you do that. And then we want to accommodate as many people as possible today, so appreciate everyone keeping your comments succinct to enable as many people as possible to contribute. Okay, so we're going to start with
Hansen, if I may, just really
yes,
briefly.
Absolutely.
Two very quick comments. I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning about emphasizing respect for varying opinions and perspectives on this issue. So we appreciate very much if your comments align with that principle. And the other thing I want to say, because it's come up as a couple of questions to me during the session, is about, who's represented in the panels and so on. And I want to emphasize that the panels are, they're made up of staff of government agencies and elected officials. And so they are not the way that we are incorporating input from broader publics, non-governmental organizations, private sector, and so on. But this is the opportunity for us to hear those more varied perspectives as well. So it's not by design that we've got particular perspectives in or out of the panels.
Right, and Commissioner, Vice President Zavaleta, may I also add that, this is the starting point. It's a really
Absolutely
information to bring everybody together to find out who's interested in talking about this, to start to process the comments and the thoughts and kind of shape the discussion in a way that will be productive as we move forward. Anybody who's on this call and people who are interested in this are all going to be a part of this process as we go forward, and they're going to have a voice in whatever the outcomes are.
Absolutely, and it's been really exciting to hear the discussion so far. I appreciate all the terrific questions. So back over to you, Melissa.
Thank you. And can't emphasize enough that this is just the beginning of the process. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of information still to be gathered, a lot of conversations to be held. And that's the beauty of the Fish and Game Commission, is that we do have a committee system that allows us to have that kind of dialogue in a committee setting, unlike a commission meeting where you're limited to 1 or 2 minutes, sometimes 3, if it's not too busy of a day. And there's not really a lot of dialogue. And our committees allow that to happen. And so the committee meetings become a really important tool for allowing multiple voices to come, participate, bring ideas and potential solutions for discussion in a broader realm. So we'll look forward to having those with our Vice President Zavaleta is also chair of our Wildlife Resources Committee. So we'll look forward to having these conversations continue in her committee. So thank you. And the other thing I'd like to add, building off of something Vice President Zavaleta said, one of the things I've always been very impressed with our stakeholders and participants in the Fish and Game Commission work is just the level of respect that is shown. I've experienced other agency meetings, and that level of respect is not always there. So appreciate our group of participants. They're wonderful. Okay, so today we have currently 4 people with their hands raised. We're going to start with Jennifer Faring, and then we're going to go to J.R. Young. So Jennifer, I'm going to open up your mic, and you may need to unmute yourself at your end.
Hey, I think I've done that. Is that the case?
Nice job.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thanks for holding this forum today. My name is Jennifer Fearing, and to be honest, I am here as a citizen today. This is a legacy issue for me. I've worked on this issue for many years and learned a lot over the years, but I'm not presently representing any particular organization or viewpoint. I'm just here as a citizen with ongoing interest in the topic. And just as a flag, I always appreciate hearing from Katie, but the Farm Bureau is not a government or elected official entity. So I would appreciate in the future, efforts to engage researchers or others that bring a different perspective perhaps to this, particularly in the realm of kind of humane, non-lethal, and frankly, to have a broader conversation about some of the nuance associated with some of the disease and hunting pressure issues that were discussed. But I wanted to lead off by appreciating the mentions by many speakers of humans as the source of this problem. I think that's just important because pigs are here because we brought them here and then we mismanaged them here. So I appreciate and recommend ongoing humility and humanity in discussing this issue, and I think it will actually help with getting to a solution that's acceptable by a broader array of the public. And I think it centers us in being honest about how we arrive at problems like this. Pigs do not possess malice. They're just doing pig things because they are finding themselves on a landscape that works for them. And then I just the other day was listening to the always wise Frankie Myers with the Yurok tribe. He was on KQED and he was talking about beavers, another critter who we've are pivoting on now, actually, who we have treated as a nuisance, but recognize we may have been wrong and have some opportunities. But he said something that he said related to beavers, but it's been really sitting with me for days, and I'll share it. He said there are no human wildlife conflicts, there are just human conflicts. And I think thinking about that writ large will be helpful in solving this and other problems. Specifically to the discussion today, I'm troubled that there was very little to no mention of humane or non-lethal methods, no discussion really about birth control potential, and then about sources, again, leading back to how they got here. How are we looking at controlling and creating accountability with respect to management of pigs, imports, canned hunts that are still operating in the state, farm escapes, etc. I feel like we need to talk about the TAP as well as talking about how we're bringing the existing numbers down. Would love to see another bite at this, as I mentioned, including researchers who can really help discuss this nuance. There are different takes on the source of E. coli and what critters on the landscape are the real risks posed there. There are different opinions, and I appreciate Roger and others raising that in other states that hunting has different impacts. It may solve a local problem, but it could cause dispersal and create a bigger problem at large, and we should wrestle with that, honestly. And then again, what developments are there in the birth control realm that could help us as a tool that, like, I think would be, if it could work, would be effective and popular writ large. Seems to me that we've rarely killed our way out of problems like this, and we need to take a critical look and use all the available tools. So thank you very much for the conversation and for letting me weigh in.
Thank you very much, Jen. And actually, you may not have been on at the time, but I do believe one of our panelists has some experience in this area, done some research on, at least on the, reproduction, and is there, are there ways that we can, are there tools available there? Dana Page from Santa Clara County Parks, I believe, had done some research. And so that might be a good person to check in with. She talked a little bit about what she had found. And if I remember correctly, to date, there really aren't any good medications available or methods available for that strategy. All right, thank you so much, Jennifer. And yes, we will have more of these conversations, and we will definitely be bringing in other perspectives to be part of that. So. Okay, so next after Jennifer, we have J.R. Young.
Hi, thanks for having me, and thanks for putting this together. Great discussion. Clearly, as we've discovered, this issue covers across, multiple. It's just extremely complex, right? There's local nuanced issues. There's broader landscape types of issues associated with it, and I'd probably agree with Ms. Fearing that we do need a comprehensive approach to this. And my bias will be that, that there's an opportunity for hunters here to help participate in things. And I would make a recommendation or something to look at, especially with private land opportunities, is I know we have share, and that's a great opportunity as well, but maybe on some smaller land parcels, maybe there's consider something like a damage roster. Montana does that with elk and deer damage, and they have damage hunts that are available, and there's a roster list that comes up, so that could potentially be an opportunity. I mean, personally, I look at the waste of it. We heard that Mid-Penn captured 300 pigs. That's potentially, if each of those pigs is upwards of 50 pounds of meat, that's potentially 45,000 meals at a third pound of a serving. So that type of stuff is important to me. I enjoy hunting in the state, all species, but also pairing them with the great wines of the state. So hunting pigs in Monterey County and pairing them with Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot Noir is absolutely fantastic. So again, my bias is, but hopefully there's some opportunities for limited private land stuff, maybe coupling that with like an advanced hunter education certification, that making sure that people are crossing certain bars. And then also with bigger state land issues, I think about Henry Coe. That's a park that's been challenged over the years. Budgetary, it's been challenged over the years. Maybe there is some limited opportunity again that, if hunting can create disruption, we've seen that in the Yellowstone ecosystem. They've talked about, elk being disrupted because wolves have come back. Well, if we can do that with pigs to mitigate their damage on the landscape, that can be a big part. But again, it's a big pie, lots of pieces, and I think all those pieces should be considered. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, JR. Appreciate those comments. and appreciate that you will continue to be part of the conversation.
Yep.
All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know you will. All right, so we also have with raised hands, Colin Gallagher and John Rishi. So Colin, I'm going to open up your line. And then Colin, you may need to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, this is Colin Gallagher and been active on, I guess I've had this regulatory petition in for related air guns for a few years now. And I wanted to thank the commissioners and the BFW staff for evaluating that. So I wanted to say thank you for that. And also, I wanted to encourage people to involve in this, whether you're just listening in for one of your first times or whether you've been in for a while, to just keep your mind open to the different perspectives here, but also to, if you haven't before, to consider getting a hunting license and to go out with somebody that's hunted pig before, because although it isn't going to erase or eradicate the pigs in the state, it's one of the important solutions we have to enjoy the environment while also helping to reduce some of the non-native species that are there. And I would also encourage the staff to, whenever they can, whenever the resources are there to do this, do kind of a comprehensive study of the numbers and on kind of an ongoing or temporary basis, kind of like they did with the bears when there was that bear question a while back in terms of numbers and types and so on. And maybe you could even ask the hunters to participate in supplying information based on their takes and whatnot as part of a study. I sometimes, wonder, because it is difficult in terms of what, how many there are based on the variation of these animals, how many they produce, and then how many are hunted. As I think Ari mentioned earlier in this meeting, just how many are there? And they just keep growing and growing. But there's no question that hunting is a necessary part of this process. So I definitely want people to keep their minds open to that. A lot of times I go on a pig hunt and it's just kind of an armed walk, but I enjoy it no matter what, whether I see a pig or don't. So this is what we do. And I appreciate you guys taking this time, this meeting, and evaluating all these issues. So I want to thank you for that.
And Colin, if I understand correctly, I think you just volunteered to help take new hunters out to go wild pig hunting.
Yeah. I mean, if they're available and they want to do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so also wishing to speak, John Rishi, followed by Annie. So John, I'm going to open up your microphone. You may need to unmute yourself at your end.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for this forum. I really appreciate it. And I will get right to my question. It's actually directed at Dennis. And I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers, LA District. And we have a feral pig problem in the Prado Basin, Santa Ana Riverbed, that was mentioned earlier. And I'm just trying to figure out, so it's on federal land and it's in designated critical habitat for the least Bell's vireo. It's riparian forest. And does the USDA Wildlife Services, would we be able to contract with them to do feral pig management? Or do we go out on our own and find it like a trapping service? What would be the best?
We can set up an agreement to come up and work with you to remove the feral swine. So yeah, just get a hold of me and then we can get an agreement set up and we can get people out there removing the feral pigs in that valley. We're aware of that, and we've been looking and trying to figure out how to get into that thing. So yeah, give me a call.
Okay, I will. Thanks, Dennis.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
And Dennis is actually, that's a similar, and John, thank you for that question. We had a similar question in the chat earlier, or the Q&A, I should say, of folks wondering, does Wildlife Services work throughout California? Is that a service that the average citizen can take advantage of? Or if the average person is having issues with wild pig, do they need to call a local pest control company? I mean, they're asking what's the process? Who can they go to? And does that include Wildlife Services?
So it's a bit, as they say, it's a little complicated, but so currently we have cost share agreements that we have with counties, 36 counties. And with that agreement, we have a wildlife service specialist, or people refer to them as a county trapper. So if they work in one of those, if they live in one of those counties and are having issues and receive a depredation permit for feral pigs, we can go in and assist them in 36 of those counties. Now, we are developing, or I'm developing, a team that can work outside our 36 counties that we work in. And because, you know, we're a fee-based system, you know, if they have problems, then we can come up, but we'll set up an agreement and we'll remove feral pigs, such as down in the LA Basin, the Santa Ana area. We don't have anybody work there, but we can sign an agreement and we can get people up there to work pigs outside of a county like our cost share counties. But yeah, we're available.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that, Dennis. And then we also have Annie would like to speak. So Annie, I'm opening up your microphone. You may need to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Excuse my voice. I'm trying to get over COVID here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it is what it is. I am a state licensed trapper, also a certified wildlife control professional, certified through the National Wildlife Control Operators Association. I do a lot of work throughout the state, and I'm curious as to why there is so much talk about, you know, USDA Wildlife Services, et cetera, when you have an incredible resource within the state, and that is state licensed trappers who often know our habitats, our local habitats, better than anyone. I've spoken with several people who have had problems with feral hogs, who are actually really surprised to find out that state licensed trappers even exist. And I'd like to know why a resource such as people like us, who are well educated and certified, are not being considered as a part of this conversation. I don't think any one agency has the ability to put a huge dent in this. I think every available resource needs to be used if we're going to even begin to get a handle on this situation. So I'm immensely curious as to why I haven't heard a single word during this entire presentation about the role of licensed private trappers in this state in regards to this issue. Thank you.
Hey, Melissa, may I just address that? You know, listen, Annie, you're absolutely right. We have to bring all resources to bear. And your comments are exactly why we have workshops like this, because this is how we bring all the ideas to the table. We're not coming out of this with a solution or even a number of solutions. We're coming out of this with ideas for a mix of solutions that will be developed and researched, and the scientists will weigh in on how it all works. But so it's not that we left that out. It's that we're here exactly for the purpose of you saying what you just said. So thank you for that.
And I'll confirm what Eric just said. And Annie, I've worked with private local trappers, and as part of my integrated pest management approach, you know, you have all these private properties bordering the parklands, and these people need services as well. So I'm sure there's something we can implement. My idea was working with local resource conservation districts and empowering them to give resources to the private landowners, because that's kind of that role that most local resource conservation districts play. So you guys have a role in this, and it's going to be one of the tools in the tool belt.
Right. I think what part of what I'm not seeing is, and I'd really like to see, and I know the public would like to see, they're just not aware that we're out there. Yeah, I mean, I've got stuff all over my website. I talk to people, whatever. And I'm more than ready to go out and deal with feral hog issues. That's not a problem. The problem there's a disconnect there between, you go to the Fish and Game website, you see all kinds of information about feral hogs, but the resources that are available, I think those resources need to be better made available to the public so that the public knows that there are other avenues that they can take should they need to. Say, an entire neighborhood is having their lawns ripped apart, going through there like a rototiller in one night and just destroying a neighborhood. Waiting for like USDA or whoever to come in and start to deal with that issue. I mean, the damage is going to continue, and these are issues that need to be dealt with on
And again, we haven't been dealing with it. That's kind of the point, is that we there hasn't been management of it. And so it's not that trappers have been ignored, it's that nothing's being done. And that's why we started this process. Right. And so really appreciate your comments. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
All right, so I don't see any other hands raised at the moment, but if anyone else would like to. Oh, Chris.
Chris
Thank you, Chris.
I'll add on to the comment about the trapping. It goes back to that big game classification as well. So there's limitations in what can be done, and trapping's limited under the current statutory classification to depredation processes and fully written out depredation permits. And so the idea of using a state licensed trapper similar to the way you would for rodent or invasives is not the same when you talk about a big game species under current classification.
There you go.
Thank you for that additional information, Chris. That's super helpful.
And listen, it looks like we have enough time. Commissioner Vice President Zavaleta is we got enough time for both of us to make comments. So, when we're ready, Melissa, why don't I go first, and then Vice President can wrap it up.
Eric, if I may, I do see one more hand raised, and just given that we have a little time, I'd be happy to hear from everybody who can weigh in.
I don't see who it is.
And then we also have a little summary wrap up as we get to the end. So Bill Gaines, see your hand there. I'm going to.
This will be an hour.
Dennis, you may want to mute yourself.
Okay.
Bill,
Sorry.
you are unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all for pulling together today's discussion. I thought it was very, very enlightening and something that we ought to do more often. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to do so. Have a few comments on this. One thing is, when it comes to managing pigs in the state of California, frankly, anywhere for that matter, there is no one silver bullet. I mean, you talk about contraception, you talk about, aerial gunning, you talk about this, you talk about that. There is no single one tool that is going to address California's wild pig problem. But one of the tools that must be included in that toolbox is hunting. Out of all the various methods that were talked about today, with the exception of contraception, hunting is really the only responsible tool. By saying responsible, I mean it's the only tool where the meat is not going to waste. And so hunters, me being one, of course, I don't harvest anything if I'm not going to eat it. And that applies to most of the hunters that I know. Through depredation or anything else, that pig is simply going to go to waste, and hunting puts that pig, whether it be by the person who actually harvested it or by donating it somewhere else, it's the only one that actually responsibly uses that meat. Also wanted to comment on the comments that were made about the possibility of using big game management account dollars for general pig management purposes. That was actually included in the bill as introduced. We worked to get that out of there because, as I think Eric Sklar mentioned and some others, those BGMA monies are to help the department manage its big game species program. And if we start ripping those monies away to pay for general pig management processes, all that's going to do is have serious impacts on other big game species who are also suffering from wild pig problems in our state because their native habitats are being destroyed. So we need to maintain the integrity of the BGMA and its application to big game management statewide. If wild pig management is a statewide issue, then it's certainly an appropriate use of general fund monies and other revenues outside of those that are generated simply by the hunting public through the purchase of pig tags or validations, whatever it may be in the future. Another thing I'd like to comment on is the SHARE program. I was one of the people that created that program 15 years ago or so with legislation. And the intent with that was to allow public hunters access to private lands. And one of the big components of that legislation, in fact, we wrote this in collaboration with the California Farm Bureau and the California Cattlemen's Association at the time, was relieving those landowners who did not want the public on their lands because of liability concerns of those liability concerns. So it's a very, very viable program. If most of the pigs are on private lands, which we know they are, the SHARE program is a perfect tool for getting hunters out on those lands without the actual landowners being concerned of some type of liability issue downstream. So whatever the department can do to increase their outreach to landowners about the availability of the program and possibly even increase the incentives to those private landowners that partake in the program, I strongly encourage them to do so. The other thing is there was some discussion today about allowing the general public to have access to public areas that are currently closed to hunting in a controlled manner, obviously, that doesn't in any way interfere with other uses out there, but using hunting as an opportunity to control pigs on those public lands, whether they be state park lands and so on and so forth, and carefully crafting a program to get hunters out there safely and legally is something that really should be looked at as, again, I mean, hunting has to be one of the primary tools, if you will, on controlling wild pigs. And if we're not putting it into application on some of those public lands, I think we need to have a conversation about where and when that would be possible so that we could do so. I thank you for the opportunity to comment again, and I thank everybody for the opportunity to have this discussion today.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate it. So just two things quickly. One, I omitted someone earlier. I apologize. We do have one other staff member who's been busily taking notes behind the scenes. A big thank you to Kimmy Rogers, our State Sea Grant Fellow, who, as I say, has been taking notes for us and using those notes to just provide us with a couple of minutes summary of what we've been hearing today is Vicki Monroe from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you all. So I'll keep these comments short. We just want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is a very important discussion. We value your engagement, your questions. We had more than 50, almost 60 come in, and your many thoughtful comments, both through the meeting chat and through your public comments. We recognize that a comprehensive integrated management approach is absolutely vital. We recognize this. We know that it needs to be humane and ethical in order for there to be a long-term effective result. We had at one point 133 participants in this forum, including our 18 panelists, and we've discussed a variety of potential solutions, including ethical hunting on public and private lands, state licensed trappers, USDA Wildlife Services, and the need for humane long-term exclusion options as well. In the first part, we went over wild pig issues. We had Dr. Webster with California Department of Food and Ag present on animal health. Excellent overview on zoonotic diseases, including pseudorabies and brucellosis. We had Dr. Brandon Monk with the Department of Fish and Wildlife providing an overview on wildlife health issues and concerns. And then Matt Cheney with MidPen speaking on ecosystem health, and Katie Little with the California Farm Bureau speaking on economic impacts specific to agriculture in particular. With that panel discussion, we got to dive in a little bit deeper and provide some additional thoughtful feedback and engagement and discussion surrounding some of the comments and questions that came through. With that, we've kind of wrapped it up with potential solutions. Dennis Orthmeyer with Wildlife Services, our state director in California, provided a fairly detailed overview on pig damage management and the principles of control management, including legal methods of control and take in California. We did briefly touch on various methods used in other states with the recognition and understanding that there are very specific regulations and codes for the state of California that guide what we are able to do. So with that, we have concluded, and I'm going to hand this off to our commissioners with closing comments. We just want to thank you again so much.
Thank you, Vicki. Vice President Zavaleta, Commissioner Sklar.
What's your pleasure, Vice President? I know you only have 5 minutes left.
I'm happy to start, and I'll keep it brief. I'm grateful for today. I'm excited about today. I really, really appreciate the work that went into just framing for all of us the magnitude of the problem. You've made that stark. And I also very much appreciate hearing about potential solutions and the resourcefulness of folks who are working to address pig and boar damage, despite the lack of a concerted effort to date. It's exciting that we're moving in that direction. Really appreciate input and ideas that we heard today from commenters as well. And I hope that this is the beginning of a concerted effort. I want to see us focus on effective responses, because it's so central to our mission on the commission to hold and enhance fish and wildlife, native fish and wildlife and their habitats and the public trust. So just the beginning of a conversation. I want to thank all of the panelists and speakers today. And thank you again, Commissioner Sklar, for your leadership on this issue. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Vice President Zavaleta. I really look forward to working with you on this. You know, some of these things take a long time, and I expect this is one of them. It's already has, but I think we've got a great team in place, both with our staff and with our commissioners to tackle this. Really want to thank everybody, all the panelists, the moderators, all the members of the public, stakeholders who've been on today and participating. It's been a really fruitful conversation. I think it's a perfect first step. I really want to thank Ari Carmen, you know, for putting this together, and Melissa, of course, as always. And just a couple points. One is, again, I don't want to, and none of us should presuppose that Senate Bill 856 is going to be signed, but in a week we'll know. And that bill, you know, does not eliminate hunting. It actually increases hunting opportunities and lowers the cost for people who take a lot of pigs each year, while protecting the big game fund. Those are critical elements to it. But it does also look at greater and stronger prohibitions against releasing pigs. And sets up this process for pig management. So, you know, we'll see where it goes, but I'm hopeful it passes. And if it does, then at the next meeting, it would be great to have staff and the department kind of do a quick presentation on what the bill entails, so everybody knows where we're starting from and what we have to do to implement that bill while we look at other issues. There's a lot of discussion about big game versus exotic, and I think a good explanation of why that was done and what that means, since that's a new thing, will be really helpful for everybody concerned. You know, looking at new methods, you know, science is evolving incredibly fast, right? I mean, I've been reading a lot about aging and just the incredible jumps that are being made monthly, you know, which is based on genetic research. All of that can be taken into account, and new science will help us find ways, possibly on reproductive methods, which is obviously a great solution generally because it's non-toxic and is humane. So we'll see where science leads us as we go through this process. I do want to say that any groups that feel like whether it's Annie as a trapper or some of the animal rights groups, the purpose of this was not to have the panelists represent the whole spectrum of views. It was to start to learn about what's going on, and really, the whole first section was about to identify what the problem is and get that on the table for everybody, and then to start to scratch the surface of solutions. Everybody who's a stakeholder who wants to be involved will be involved in this process, and I really look forward to it. And just finally, I got something out there. I never heard WOWI before as the wildland urban interface. I love that, and I will be using that. So thank you for whoever used that term for the first time here for me. So thank you, everybody. Again, thank you, Vice President Zavaleta. Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate you both being here. And of course, a huge thank you to our co-hosts, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and all of the staff from the department who helped us put this together, as well as participated today. I couldn't have done it without them, absolutely. So huge thank you. And thank you to all of our participants for being here and attending, and for those who provided commentary, and to our panelists. We'll look forward to continuing the conversation. Sounds like definitely at the October Commission meeting, one way or another.
There you go.
All right, have a great rest of the day.